How's it going today? Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course Lesson Book Level 1. This video is Lesson 78, and we're going to cover pages 90 and 91 in the book today. The song, He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. All right, so let's dig in on pages 90 and 91. And the first thing you notice is there's very little pedal in this piece. There's just a couple of pedal markings at the very end at the bottom of 91. So I'm not going to use the pedal camera on this lesson. I'll just talk about those couple of pedal markings when we get to that point. But at least you get a little break from pedal, for better or worse. It's certainly one less thing to think about. And probably for better, because this is going to be a pretty busy lesson. We've got one song here, but it's going to be played 3 times. So if you notice in the pink boxes, you're actually going to be playing the same song in these different keys. So we're going to start out with the key of G major, which has 1 sharp, and you can see that reflected there in the key signature. So as a review, when you have 1 sharp in your key signature, all Fs are going to be sharped unless they are marked otherwise, like with a natural. When you get to the bottom of page 90, the second pink box, we've got the key of C major. That's no sharps and no flats. So typically, you're going to have all white keys. And then in the middle of page 91, the key of F major, we got 1 flat. So all Bs are going to be flat. And when we get to the end of page 91 at the very end, there's a couple of different chords and things on the very last measure, simply because we're just ending the entire song at that point. But basically, you're going to be playing this same piece in 3 different keys. They don't tell us this, but that's called transposing or transposition. Sometimes you may be familiar with singers who say, you know, that's too high for me. I need that in a lower key. So for a pianist, you can play in different keys. You can take the same tune, the same chords, and just put it in a different key. Now, how does that work for a pianist? It's probably not as helpful, or at least it's not helpful in the same manner as it is for a singer. Most of the time, a singer is going to do it because it just fits their vocal range better. Now, for a pianist, you know, you have quite a wide range and you learn to play all of it, but some keys are easier than others. So, you know, the argument, which is probably an easy one to win, is that C major is easier to play because no sharps or flats. With that being said, not every piece is written to be played in every key. So I'll explain what that means. Every key has a different sound, a different richness, if you will. And of course, that's open to debate of which keys sound better than others. Now, I, for one, find keys that have like 5, 6, 7 sharps or flats, which are really hard to play on the piano, actually are really nice sounding keys and have really nice sounding chords. But when you have a composer who creates a piece, you know, they often select a key to put that piece in. And it really just sounds like it was meant for that key. Now, I can play that piece in other keys, but the composer often, you know, planned on that piece for a particular key and a particular sound. So I'm digressing here a little bit. But when it comes to doing it on piano, some keys are going to be easy to play than others. But the other thing about playing it in different keys is you can take the same piece, and by just simply playing it in another key, it gives it a refreshing sound. Rather than playing this piece 3 times in the key of G major, you're going to see it's going to sound far more interesting and fun to hear it in 2 other keys, C major and F major. Now, that makes it a little more difficult to play, yes. But for the listener, it's certainly going to be more entertaining. All right, so let's dig in. It says at the top of page 90, this piece reviews the 1, 4, and 5, 7 chords of the keys of G major, C major, and F major. It also reviews syncopated notes in preparation for the entertainer on pages 92 and 93. So that's going to be our next lesson. We've sort of hinted at syncopation maybe 2 times in this book. And they've given very, very basic examples. This is the first piece where you're really going to start digging into syncopation, and it's going to get a little more challenging. So that's the other challenge today, is not just playing in different keys, but dealing with syncopation. And then when we get to the Entertainer, which is a very famous ragtime piece, that style is really built off of a lot of syncopation. So this is sort of prep for what's to come. That being said, this is a very popular piece and can be a lot of fun. So the 1, 4, and 5, 7 chords. So let's review this. So we're starting out in G major, and your left hand has got the G major chord in the entire first line. So as a review, this is root position, G, B, and D, with the fingering of 5, 3, and 1. And it's a really basic rhythm. You're just playing quarter notes of this chord throughout the piece. And most of the piece is quarter notes in your left hand. So that acts like a sort of metronome, just keeping track of the 4 beats per measure. On the second line, we're going to go to the 5-7 chord, which is a D7. Now, I won't get into the details of spelling it out from root position and the 4 notes and going down the 3 notes. That's just going to take a lot of time. We've talked a little bit about that in the past. But for now, I'm just going to focus on what's here on the page and just memorizing that this right here, F sharp, C, and D, is the D7 chord. You'll also notice they do not label these chords. In the previous lessons, they would write above the treble clef the name of those chords. So you don't have that. Now, you could write that in if you want, but just notice that that is missing information this time around. So the second line, you've got the D7 chord, which again is F sharp, C, and D. And you've got that for the first 2 measures. In the last measure, we're going to go back to the G chord, and we're going to do the same on the third line. And then on the third line, second measure, we've got our D7. And when we get to the last measure of the third line, this is our last measure before we go into C major. This is the only time we have the 4 chord, which is a C chord. But it's spelled with G in the bass, C in the middle, and then E at the top. And there is a bit of syncopation with that rhythm there. So since we're talking about the left hand, we'll go ahead and talk about that. It's all been quarter notes up to this point. So on beat 1, you've got an 8th note, and that's G chord. On the end of beat 1, you're going to come in on the C chord. But notice that even though it comes in on the end of beat 1, the C chord is not an 8th note. It is a quarter note, so it's going to hold over onto beat 2. So the fact that it comes in on the and of 1, which is a weak part of the beat, and is holding through the first half of beat 2, that essentially is syncopation. When you have a long note that comes in on the and, or the weak part of the beat, in this case the and is holding through the strong beat, or the strong part of a beat, which is beat 2. So you've had all these quarter notes before, which is just, that's not syncopation. That's just straight 1, 2, 3, 4. Even if I'm counting with ands, it's still 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and they're all in the strong parts of the beats. But here on this last measure on the third line, we're going 1 and 2, and then back to the G chord on the and of 2. So that you feel that little push, this push and then hold, and then we're back. That's the syncopation. 1 and 2 and. Comparing it, if I played them all as quarter notes, it would just be 1 and 2 and 3 and, right? They're all even. But with the syncopation, that sort of push, hold, and then pull back, that's a little bit of syncopation. So 1 and 2 and. Now that's part of the challenge. The other part is getting from the G chord to the C chord quickly and smoothly. So you really need to practice that. So study, your fingering on the G chord and going into the C chord. So if you look at your fingering, The G chord is 5 on G, 3 on B, and thumb on D. Now, when you go to the C chord, you're going to keep that 5 on G because the same note's there. Look at where my second finger is. It should be on or around middle C. And that is a note you're going to play in the next chord, which means the only finger that really moves is your thumb. Your thumb's going to go up to E. So the thumb extends to E. And then your fifth finger is just staying on G the whole time. And then you've got this exchange between 2 on B in the G chord. I'm sorry, 3 on B in the G chord and 2 on C in the C chord. Now, another little trick you can do is break it up so that you're just doing one note at a time. In other words, instead of doing the whole chord, maybe I just do my fifth finger. So that's easy because it's just G. Maybe I do the middle note of all three chords. So the middle note is B, C, B. So you see what I'm doing? I'm breaking up the bottom note, now the middle note of each chord, and then the top note, and practicing them individually. Then you can tie them together, maybe the bottom two notes. So you're just focusing on just small movements at a time rather than just going for the entire chord. So when I do the bottom two notes, it's really this 3 and 2 that get a lot of the attention and focus. You could do the top two notes also, the B and the D. Notice there's a little bit more movement involved because I got my thumb plus B to C. You could do the bottom and the top note. And when you do that, just notice how the hand expands a little bit and then comes back. And then put it all together. So there's a lot of ways you could break this up, and of course you want to go slow too. But no matter how slow you go, you want to go ahead and get used to this rhythm. You don't want to practice this so much as, steady quarter notes. So 1 and 2 and, even if you go slow. Now we're going to see this rhythm again one more time. We're going to see it when we go into the key of C major on the next page. So wrapping up the key of G major for the left hand, it's just 99% of it is a combination of the G chord and the D7 chord. And then it's just that last measure where you see the C chord right there. That's the only time we see the C chord. And rhythmically speaking, going back to the beginning, it's just quarter notes. Just very steady. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And you're going to do that the whole piece. Now, eventually you're going to want to play it really light when we combine the hands together to give this song some bounce, if you will. It says moderately and rhythmically up there, but I like to almost half staccato this left hand. I'll leave that up to you, but eventually I would recommend doing that. You don't have to, but it is going to make for a more exciting piece. You could wait until the very end, really, if you wanted to even implement that. But that is something to consider. Notice the left hand doesn't play until the very first full measure. Our right hand comes in with a little pickup. So we got 4 beats per measure, and your left hand is resting. Well, really, you don't have to worry about your left hand until it comes in on the next measure. So let's jump over to the right hand now. So the right hand is not really in a G position. Your left hand was really in this G position the whole time. Your left hand, if you notice my fingering, is sort of, I've got my thumb on G, and then I've got 2 on B, 3 on C, 4 on D, and 5 on E. Now I'm looking ahead here at some things, and that's why I've got this position. The very first note of the piece is 4 on D, and you got 2 Ds followed by a B. It's an incomplete measure. They're all eighth notes, so that's going to be and, 4, and. Okay? And, 4, and then the hands come in together. Sounds like someone's car alarm went off. Okay, we're done with that. Good. Wasn't even in the same key. I like it when they're in the same key. At least then it can keep going. All right, so when you get to the first full measure, you're going right back to this D. It's a half note with the fourth finger for two counts since it's a half note. And then on beat 3, you're going to 2 on B, and then your thumb comes down to G. So that's why I went ahead and had my thumb down on G when I started and had this hand position. I'm really outlining the entire first line of this piece. So you might want to get in the habit of doing that. It's a little awkward, it's a little different, but like I said, at least your thumb is already ready to go. So there it is, already outlining those that first measure and a half. Now when we get to the third measure, we're back to the D. D, E, D. Now this second D in that measure is tied. And we're going to get to rhythm here in just a moment. I'm going to cover the notes first in the right hand before we get to rhythm. And I'm going to pretty much take this piece a key at a time. So I'm going to focus everything on the key of G right now because a lot of it's very repetitive when we get to the key of C. So going back to the top line, the last measure, we've got 4 on D, 5 on the E, and then back to D. It's a tie, so these next two Ds are tied together. You're not going to play them individually. That being said, you still have 2 more Ds you're going to play. And then the very last note is your second finger on B. So let's look at that last measure again. We got 4 on D, 5 on E, 4 on D, and then 2 more Ds, and then B. So let's review that first line. So at the very beginning, we got 4 on D, played twice, down to 2 on B, and then back to 4 on D for a half note, and then B, and our thumb down to G, which is tied, by the way. That G is tied. Third measure, or the last measure there on that line, back to 4 on D, E, back to D, 2 more Ds, and then B. Now going down to the second line, we have an interesting bit of fingering here. We've got our third finger on C. Notice my third finger is right there on C. But we have C again with the fourth finger. So the only reason that is necessary is something must be coming up where currently my thumb, most likely, is not able to reach. And if we look ahead, there is an F sharp. And yes, my thumb would have a hard time reaching it. I could do it, but this is going to be a little bit easier, switching to the 4 on the C. And then that makes for 2 on A and our thumb on F sharp. Now, this is our first sharp in the right hand. So remember, all Fs are sharped here in the key of G. So again, that's 3 on C, switch to 4 on C, make sure 2 comes down to A, and thumb down to F sharp. Now, you're essentially going to go back to the same position. In the next measure, it shows 4 on D, but I can tell you right now that you're going back to this position that you had at the very beginning. So, second measure, 4 on D, up to E, back to the D. And this is a repeat of the last measure of the first line. So that D in the middle of the measure here is tied again, and you got 2 more Ds, and then 2 on B. The last measure on the second line, we got D, and it's a half note, and then we've got 2 on B, and down to thumb on G. If that feels familiar, that's a repeat of the first full measure of the piece. Let's go ahead and go down to the third line. So we're back to 4 on D, 5 on E, 4 on D again. We've seen this measure before. So this D is tied, followed by 2 more Ds, and then B. Now the second measure, we've got another finger switch on the same note. We got 4 on D, switch it to 5 on D, and then 4 on C, 2 on A, and then we end comfortably with our thumb on G. Yeah, I mean, it's probably better to do that switch there. I played it without switching, and it worked, but it's a little bit more of a stretch. So on the second measure on the third line, let's honor that. 4 on the D, switch it to 5 on the D, 4 on the C, down to 2 on the A, and thumb on the G. All right, here's the thing that you may not recognize or realize, since this is your first lesson essentially in transposition. Everything I just played in both hands, you're playing it again in the key of C major. It's going to feel very, very different though. It's going to sound the same, but also sound different in the sense that it's going to sound lower. So I'll get more to that in a moment, but the reason I'm saying this is that I'm going to go ahead and get into the rhythms now in the right hand of what we just worked on. And then I'm going to put the hands together. Because at that point, when we get into the key of C major and key of F major, I'm not going to dig as deep because it's so repetitive. Now, the one thing that does repeat exactly until we get to the very, very end of page 91 are the rhythms. All the rhythms in the left hand and right hand repeat exactly. So I'm going to really dig into this syncopation and this counting here in the key of G major. I'm not going to keep digging into it in the same manner because it is repetitive. So keep that in mind, that if you're working later on in the piece, you might need to come back to this point in the video. Right here, I'm going to start digging into this count in the right hand with the syncopation. So I'm only going to work the right hand. I'm going back to the beginning. So remember, it's an incomplete measure. So we're going to count with ands because there's a ton of eighth notes in this piece. And with syncopation, you definitely need to count with ands. Probably for a long time until you really, really get comfortable with these rhythms. And I don't mean on this piece, I mean a lot of pieces from now on. So at incomplete measure, we've got 3 eighth notes. So that's essentially a beat and a half total. So we're coming in on the and of 3 and then 4 and. So and, 4, and. Now the next measure is a half note. So that's easy. That's just a steady 1 and 2 and. Now here's our first bit of syncopation in the right hand. The syncopation occurs on beat 4, and you can see the visual element of it, the tie. When you have a note that comes in and it's tied into, like we said earlier with the left hand, or of course the left hand wasn't a tie earlier, but this, you can see this tie. When you see this tie, that means you're holding what's happening on beat 4. And if we're holding what's happening on beat 4 and it came in on the and of 3, that's syncopation. So we've got this B on beat 2, excuse me, beat 3, going down to a G on the and. So 3 and 4 and. It came in on the and of 3, we held it on 4, that's the syncopation. So 3 and 4 and. Now playing just that by itself doesn't feel like syncopation at all. You're not going to really feel it until you put the left hand together with the right hand, because your left hand is playing steady chords on both on all the strong beats. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now you can feel it a little more because this right hand came in between these strong beats that the left hand's accentuating, and then it just kind of sits there. Now the next measure is even more challenging. We have even more syncopation. We actually have 2 moments of syncopation. Remember the left hand we did at the beginning of the lesson? 1 and 2 and. Your right hand's doing it. 1 and 2 and. It's the same visual representation of an eighth note, a quarter note, back to an eighth note. But this eighth note that it comes back to is tied. So that's even more syncopation. So we've got 1 and 2 and 3. So it's really 2 notes that are back to back. You've got this E on the and of 1, and then the D on the and of 2. So both of those are syncopated. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now those eighth notes are not syncopated. The one that comes in, the D that comes in on the and of 3, it would only be syncopated if we held it through beat 4, but we're not. We're playing another D on beat 4. So that is no longer syncopation. So this last measure is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now listen to it with both hands. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So you might still say, I'm not sure if that sounds like anything spectacular. Well, let me try to put the whole line together up to tempo and see if you start to feel it. So you feel that? Now I'm bringing it out a little bit. I might be accenting and things like that, but those pushes in the right hand in conjunction with the steadiness of the left hand. Right there, and then so that bump, 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 that's syncopation. So now, hopefully, that starts to make a little more sense. So when you're working on syncopation very slowly, you're breaking it down with the counting, it's probably not even going to feel like it. It's a very slow process. If this is challenging for you, don't fret. I struggled immensely with syncopation. I really didn't do much of it until I got into college, into music school, because I was classically trained. I never used this book. And everything I played was just always on the beat. I probably had some syncopation, a little bit here or there, but very, very little. And I mean, I was painstakingly counting things so slow, breaking it down again and again until I didn't give up. And that's what made the difference. I literally just didn't give up. And some pieces took just weeks of, maybe an hour or two every day. But I eventually got it to where I could get it faster and faster and faster. And I was still counting, and it sounded a little robotic, if you will. But one day when I finally got it fast enough and I started to feel it and I stopped counting, that's when the turnaround happened. So I didn't just like magically just start feeling it. I had to work at it. I had to build myself up. And if it wasn't for the counting and starting slow and breaking it down, I don't think I would have ever gotten there. I wouldn't have just been able to just feel this one day. I had to work at it in steps. So that being said, I truly believe anyone could achieve this. It's just a matter of how much time and effort and consistency are you willing to put into it. But I can tell you this, I love syncopation. So to this day, I mean, it's, a couple decades later, but I can whip through this piece without giving it a second thought. Now, I don't expect you to play it like that fast at all, but my point is, I'm having a blast with it. It's so much fun to play. I'm not even having to count it anymore. So you put enough time and effort into it, it's going to come. And eventually it's going to be a ton of fun and open up all new doors, all new styles of music. And like the book said, preparing you for the entertainer, which is a ragtime piece. So going back to the right hand, I'm going to count through the entire first line, just the right hand. Now, since it's a pickup notes, incomplete measure, I should say, I am going to give us a little count off and then come in on the and of 3. Let's see if we can try this. Now, at this point, you want to have all your fingering and all your notes already learned. It's going to be really hard to still figure out notes when we're doing this counting. So here we go. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Some of you may notice my leg was going up and down. I just have this tendency to keep that steady beat. Like I said, your left hand will do it eventually, but you're going to have the challenge of putting your left and right hand together. And you may not even be able to keep a steady beat going with your leg. But if you can, it's kind of cool because you're going to feel the syncopation even more because you're, reminding yourself where the beat is while you're playing these notes that are in between the beat, okay? But if you're counting, that's all you need. It comes down to the counting, so. All right, so let's look at our second line. Now, we're right here with the third finger on C. It's going to change to the fourth finger. And then we got a little bit of syncopation at the end of this measure. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, that's pretty easy because just like the very first full measure, your only syncopation is just holding this note. It's not like that last measure on the top line, which is a little more challenging. Which, by the way, your second measure on the second line is an exact duplicate of the last measure on the first line. Notice the left hand, though, is different, but your right hand is still 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then the last measure of the second line is like the first full measure of the first line. So you got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and guess what? The third line, first measure, same notes and rhythm as the last measure of the first line, second measure of the second line. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So you're going to get some really good practice with that rhythm because it happens 3 times in this key, which means it's going to happen 3 more times in the key of C major and the key of F major. Now on the third line, second measure, different notes, but same pattern, same rhythm that we saw at the first measure of the second line. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then 1 and 2 and then we're off. So that's kind of cool. There's some repetition. In fact, quite a bit of repetition. So most, if not 95% of all the rhythm, I'll go ahead and say that occurs in the entire 2 pages, is presented in the very first line here. These first 2 full measures. That's almost your entire rhythm throughout the entire piece. So that's kind of cool. That tells me if you really dig in to those 2 measures, now it's not going to be the same notes. It may not even be the same fingering, but it's the same rhythm. If you dig into that rhythm and practice that, you're going to be in really good shape for the whole piece. So I'm going to start putting the right hand with the left hand because the sooner you do this, the more this is really going to make sense. It's going to be hard, but it's also going to be helpful because, like I said, the left hand's keeping the beat. The hard part, of course, is coordinating it, getting your hands to think independently of each other. Don't even worry about the left hand being pretty. If it has to be harsh and loud, that's fine. I mentioned earlier playing it light and bouncy. That's probably the very last thing you want to do when you work this piece. So, of course, the first thing is to have your hand position. And I'm really going to line up things right now. So sometimes when you bring the hands together, you don't necessarily have to count right away. What might be more beneficial, if you're really struggling with this, is what I call vertical playing. I've mentioned this in the past. There's 3 things that happen when you bring your hands together. Either your hands hit at the same time, or the right hand hits and the left hand hits. Now, sometimes when the right hand hits, the left hand's holding a note or resting, and vice versa. But it's either both hands, right hand, or left hand. And that's basically it, at least for now in these pieces. So at the beginning here, we've got our right hand playing the first 3 notes, and then this is where we have both hands on beat 1. Now on beat 2, it's just the left hand with the G chord. Beat 3, it's both hands. Now on the and, it's the right hand. And then on beat 4, it's the left hand. That's the tricky part of the measure, the second half of this first full measure. So if I start on beat 3, I've got both hands, right hand, and then left hand. Once you get that down, then add in the count. So this is beat 3 we're coming in on. 3 and 4 and. You could stay there and just work on speeding that up. That would be a really good use of your practice. Not only your practice time in general, but working on syncopation. So 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and. Now I'm speeding up the process tremendously. I don't expect you to go that fast that soon. And notice how I dropped the count. So eventually you want to drop the count and feel it, internalize it. So that's what I highly recommend too. Just taking these tidbits of syncopation and repeating them again and again and again so that your brain is just memorizing this process of together, right, left. And then, of course, apply the counting. 3 and 4 and. Then back up to the beginning of the measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And like I said, you're going to see that rhythm a lot. If you jump down to the second line first measure, the only difference is instead of a half note in the right hand, it's 2 quarter notes. And you do have the finger switch, yes. But other than that, it's the same rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's the same rhythm right there. On beat 3, hands together, right hand, left hand. So essentially the same thing. Now let's jump back to the top line. We're going to go to the last measure. This is the hardest measure in the piece. And we're going to see it again and again and again. So both hands play on beat 1. The right hand comes in on the and. And then the left hand on beat 2. The right hand on the and. Left hand on 3. Right hand on and then both hands on 4 and. Now, you know what I like about this? Something is playing on every half a beat, whether it's both hands or right hand, left hand. Now, there is a pattern. In the middle of the measure, so here's beat 1, hands together, but after that, it's right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, and then we end it hands together, and then right hand on the and. So you've got this right, left, right. But when you do that, don't get in the habit of doing this. So hands together, right, left, right, left. No, you don't want to be bouncy, because what happens is you're lifting off of the note in the right hand. That's quarter note, followed by a tight eighth note. That has to stay down. Your right hand is also smooth legato. There's a big slur. So don't start, when I say right, left, keep in mind that's where the hits are, not where the lifts are. So you can't lift early. So it's together, right hand, keep it down, and then left hand. In fact, if you want, for now, forget any staccato in your left hand. Keep it down. Right hand, left hand, right hand, and then together. Once you get that down, then start adding in your count. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And like I said, hit that measure again and again and again until it just starts becoming natural. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So now we get a little bit faster and a little bit faster. Let's put the whole first line together. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I probably went a little bit faster than I should have. Now, if I do that without the counting, I want you to hear how that syncopation is starting to already come in play. Of course, we hear a lot of it in that last measure. Jumping down to the second line. So we covered this earlier. Now, the second line gets tricky note-wise more than rhythm-wise, because this rhythm, if you've practiced enough on the first full measure, you're essentially duplicating that like we talked about earlier. But you got to switch to the D7 chord. You got your third finger on C and then switching it to 4. You might just do this a few times. Get used to this. So that's not even a rhythm practice. That's just working out coordination with notes and fingering. When we get to beat 3, we've got that same rhythm we had at the top line in the first full measure. 3 and 4 and then we'll put it together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now going on to the next measure, it is exactly like the last measure on the first line. You just stay on the D7 chord, but everything else is exactly the same. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So when you're practicing the last measure on the top line, you might want to jump down to the second measure on the second line, Because when you do that, you say, huh, they feel exactly the same. The only difference is the chord. But other than that, the pattern feels the same. And it is the same. When you go to the third line, first measure, same thing, back to the G chord. So compare those three measures, last measure, middle measure, and first measure on the first three lines, and it's the same pattern. That will save you a lot of effort and time. Rather than going through this piece from beginning to end, even these three lines from beginning to end, I implore you to do those measures. Do them a lot. Compare those measures. Realize it's the same thing. To the point where when you play the piece straight through, it's almost like, here's that measure again, and the switch gets flipped on and you do it. Rather than starting at the beginning and when you get to the middle line, second measure, you're just like, man, this is tough. Look at this rhythm here. Rather than your brain saying, you just did that at the end of the first measure. Try that. It's going to take time. Absolutely, it's going to take time. But in the long run, it's going to save you time, and you're going to get a better reward out of this and better results. When we go to the last measure of the second line, this is exactly like the beginning. And that's why the third line is the same as the last measure. And then this is a lot like the second line, first measure. You got the finger switch, and you've got the same D7 chord. So, and then here's our syncopation, 3 and 4 and then do you remember this we worked on? It's been a while. This is the only time the left hand gets syncopation. 1 and 2 and then you're off. And make sure you come off, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, not just because it's marked as eighth rests, but you're going to need that little bit of a time to switch over for the key of C major. So there's a little spoiler of what's to come. The last measure in that left hand, I didn't mention this earlier, but they have accents. I firmly believe those accents are there to bring out the rhythm musically and to help you as the player. Because when you push into the piano to get an accent, to get a louder sound, that will help you push this rhythm. 1 and 2 and. It's not even in the right hand, it's actually in the left hand. Right? All right, so I'm going to play all of these first three lines in the key of G major. I'm going to go slow. I'll give us a count off, and then I'm just going to play it all so you can hear how it all comes together. So 1 and 2 and 3. And then we're off. Now, before we talk about the transition, because that's another difficult thing and a big part of this lesson, transitioning from one key to the other. When you transition in music, when you change keys, so now we're going to C major, your initial thought might be, well, that's easy. I'm just going to all white keys. Your brain, again, has to be like a switch. It just switches automatically to the key of C major. No sharps, no flats now. And in addition, you're changing the position on the piano. So when we look at the right hand at the bottom line, our fourth finger is now on G. But if you look at my outline, this is the same gap that I started the piece with up here. So that's transposing. I'm going to do the exact same positioning of notes down here. And that's going to take some getting used to. So once you've worked the key of G major up and you start working C major, I recommend that when you go through the right hand of C major, refer to G major. In other words, refer to the fingering. It's the same exact fingering. It's the same exact intervals. So if you come back down and play that pattern, the nice thing about it is you may not have to go through and read the notes, because when you transpose, you're not playing the same notes, but everything else is the same. The fingering, the rhythms, the patterns. When you get to the left hand in a moment, well, actually, no, when we get to the right hand too, the one thing that's going to feel different is we have no F sharp. So that part is going to feel a little bit different. So, you know, at the beginning of the second line, we had an F sharp. When we go to the beginning of the second line of C major, so that's the top of page 91, you might think, oh, that's supposed to be a B flat, a black key, right? No. And you can hear it. That's in G major. You hear it? It doesn't make sense. You hear it now, so that makes a little more sense. So that part's a little different, and that's just because that's the way the piano's done. If someone were to sing it, it would make a difference, because the singer doesn't have to feel, you know, a higher key and a lower key, and they don't touch. Singers don't touch. They use their vocals, right? It's a different thing. So they're not even having to worry about different placement of their vocal. I mean, I say that, and singers are going to argue with me. Oh, yes, we do have to worry about a placement. Well, it's a vocal placement. I'm talking about touch and height and things like that with your fingers. So on the piano, that is the only difference. Where you expect a black key, you're not going to have a black key necessarily in the same place. But otherwise, it is the same. That's why I'm not going to go through these next two keys quite in the detail that I just did in G major, because it's all the same. So your melody is exactly the same. Going to the bottom of page 90, it even comes in on a pickup. And 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's all the same. And then we got G, A, G. Top of the next page, we got the same finger switch. 3 on F to 4 on F, and then D, B. Then jumping the hand back up to 4 on G, 5 on A, G, 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 E, G, and then E, C. Second line, G, A, G, 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 E. And then here we got the finger switch again, 4 on G, 5 on G, F, D, and then C. So I'm not even going to go through any more detail than that, because, like I said, essentially it's the same thing. And these are all notes you know anyway. You've played these notes since the beginning of this book pretty much. Same with the chords. Very basic chords you had very early on. So the bottom of page 90, these are all C chords in the root position. When you get to the top of 91, the G7 chord, B, F, and G as a review. The end of that line, C chord. Beginning of the second line, still the C chord, second measure, G chord. And here is our same rhythm, and the only time we have the 4 chord, in this case it's an F chord, C, F, and A, back to C. So I said that would happen once again. So that's the 1 and 2 and, right? 1 and 2 and. When you put the hands together, it's the same process we talked about with G major. And when you work on the right hand, I would hope that at this point, if you spend a lot of time with the rhythm in the right hand of G major, it's the exact same rhythm. So all your syncopation should be familiar. And when you put the hands together, it's the same, you know, the second measure down there on the bottom line, the first full measure, 1 and 2 and then together, right hand and then left hand. It's the same exact coordination. Listen to what this sounds like with both hands. So I'm just going to play at the beginning of the bottom line. And that has those accents as well, just to help you push. So you can hear it's the exact same thing. Now, the one thing I didn't talk about was the transition. That's going to be tricky. Now, the best way to handle this is it's gonna feel like you're starting in the middle of something, but that's what makes this good. When you go to the third line on page 90, the last measure. So we're back in the key of G major. And you can do this hand separate, by the way. You got your thumb on G. If you look at the next line, you're going to 4 on G. Practice this, maybe with your eyes closed, just getting used to thumb on G to 4 on G. Now, the other thing was, remember the fingering changes here at the end. So you could practice even going to this outline. Yeah, this outline. But at least just for now, just practice going from your thumb to 4. That would be very, very helpful in itself. Your left hand, the last thing you play is a G chord, and then you're going down to a C chord. That's a pretty big jump. Now you have a little bit more time because of the rests, but you want to practice doing that as quickly as possible, because when you put the hands together, obviously it gets a little more tricky. Now, when you put the hands together, don't worry about your timing yet. Just play these chords. And then I want you to move your hands together. Because look at my left hand, it's right there. You don't want to do this. My left hand's not there. Therefore, my right hand played, and my left hand was still trying to figure out where to go. So, get in this habit of moving the hands in sync. Now, they're both moving essentially to the C position. Yeah, the right hand is a little bit of a stretch C position, kind of like we had that G position at the beginning. But it's close enough. So this transition, you're going to want to really practice. And I guarantee you, once you go through G major, C major separately, that is going to be your next challenge. You're going to find that making that switch instantly is harder than it looks. But that's how you can defeat it. You can just home in on the last measure going into the first measure. Once you've got that down, maybe back up just a measure. Now, if you need more than an eighth rest to make the move, of course, that's fine. But eventually, you're going to want to try to make it just an eighth rest. Okay? And then at that point, you should be good to go. Now, notice mezzo forte for the beginning, but when you switch, just for more variety, they have it piano, soft. It makes it even more interesting. And then we get to the key of F major. Key of F major. Oh, one more thing. Notice at the end of the third line on page 90, at this last measure, they give us some information that can be helpful. As a reminder, if you look right after that, the very end of that line, there's a double bar line. Now, it's not the double bar line that you see at the end of a piece, but it's a double bar line that you see at the end of like a section or a change. And then after it, we see naturals. Those natural signs are a reminder that the F is now natural. No more F sharp. We're going to the key of C major. Music will often do this. They'll try to give you a little heads up to the key signature change. So that's what that means. So when we go to key of F major, look at page 91, the end of the second line. We see those same two lines, and then we see B flats, a reminder that all Bs are now going to be flat. Then when we go to F major, it's the same same steps, the same formula for going, making this transition. You want both hands to move together. Now, your right hand, your fourth finger is going to go to C. Your left hand's going to the F chord. And just like the key of C major and just like key of G major, it's all the same. Here's our F chord in the left hand and our same intervals and rhythms in the right hand. Now, I'm just going to speed up the process and do hands together, but you're definitely more than welcome to play it hands separately. I still would encourage that. Now, here's the hard part. It's the same notes in the key of F major, but on the well, this is the fourth line of page 91. You've got B flats all over the place. In the left hand, this is our C7 chord, E, B flat, and C. So obviously you need to review these chords first. F chord, C7 with the B flat, and then when we get to the last two measures, you're going from an F chord to a B flat chord. It's the only time you're going to see it. F, B flat, and D. And we'll get to that in just a little bit because the music is a little bit different there at the end. So going back to the beginning of the fourth line, C chord in the left hand, B flat with your third finger in the right hand, and you're going to switch the same finger switch we've been doing from 3 to 4, but now it's on a black key. So it's a little bit trickier because you could, you know, easily slip off if you're not careful. Continuing, we've still got our same pattern and rhythms. And the second measure, that's our tons of syncopation measure. Back to the F chord. And then the bottom line, same measure with all the syncopation. Now these last three measures are different because the song is ending. We got our C7 chord, we got 4 on C in the right hand, big jump to 2 on C in the right hand, and then D on beat 3, we go to E on the and then it's tied, we just hit the chord again, and then here is where we use pedal. So you're going to come down with the pedal. In the left hand, you've got the F chord. In the right hand, you've got A with your thumb and F with your fifth finger. All that's going to come down together. When you go to beat 3, this is that B flat chord we talked about. And you're going to have to pedal here because an F chord and a B flat together are very muddy. Now they suggest 2 on B flat and 5 on F. I think that's fine. I like that you have 2s on B flats in both hands. If you want though, if it's easier, you could just bring your thumb there. I think that's fine as well. And then the very last chord of the piece in both hands is just back to the same F chord and A and F in the right hand. So you're going from here to here. Now this one has a fermata on it. That's what those curved lines with the dot inside means. You're going to hold that as long as you want. And then pedal and hold that one, maybe even longer since it's at the end of the song. There is the ritardando on the second measure of that line. So we're slowing down, and then here we really put on the brakes. And this is very dramatic. I got softer, but it looks like it stays forte the whole time. All right, so other than that, I'm just going to go ahead and play the entire piece all the way through. I'm not going to play it too fast, but eventually I'll put up a separate video that you can access where I'm playing this whole thing up to speed and I'm doing that bounce in the left hand. But for now, just because it's a lot to work on, it is very repetitive, but it's still a lot to work on. I'm going to play it on the slow side for you. From the very, very beginning, I'll give a count off, and then we're just going to go. So 1 and 2 and 3. And there it is. All right. So one other thing I might mention is at the top of page 91, I was tempted in both hands. So I've got an F in the right hand, an F in the chord in the left hand. I was tempted to hit the F sharp. And it makes complete sense because the last time we played these Fs, they were sharped. If that happens, if you're tempted to do that, you can always go in and circle them or write a natural sign. Perfectly acceptable to do that. But just keep in mind that you might encounter that temptation because all Fs were sharp. And that just goes back to making that switch so that right when you're in the key of C major, boom, all Fs are natural. Everything is natural. And likewise, when you go into F major, you might want to mark some of your B flats. They don't occur until the beginning of the fourth line. And like we said earlier, they're in both hands. So if you miss one of those or both of them, you're going to hear it. It's going to sound pretty awful. But you might want to mark the flat signs there as well. All right, so it's a fun little piece. Like I said, I'll put a separate video up where I'm playing it up to speed and a little bit more of the style with the bouncy left hand. Certainly don't even worry about that. If you struggle with syncopation, this is going to be a terrific lesson for you and an important lesson because going on to the entertainer, we're just going to get into more syncopation. Syncopation is something that is found in tons of styles of music, pop music, rock music, jazz, not so much in things like classical, maybe not so much in sacred. Well, if it's contemporary sacred, you're going to see a ton of it. So more often than not, you're going to see syncopation. Rhythms are tough. Syncopated rhythms are even tougher. But if you conquer it now, spend your time with this lesson on it, spend a measure at a time going through the motions again and again and again and counting it out, you'll thank yourself in the future. If you skip this lesson, if you just breeze through it and think you got it, if you just try to feel and get lucky with it, you're going to get super frustrated in the future. And you might even get frustrated to the point where you just kind of give up. So you've come this far. You don't want that to happen now. So I promise, it's going to take time. It took a lot of time with me, but I promise if you keep at it, you will get it. Don't know when. It's different for everyone, but I guarantee it's going to happen. All right, so if you got any questions or comments, as always, leave them in the section below. I'm happy to answer them. And remember, our next lesson is the entertainer. Very fun piece, but lots of rhythms. I look forward to it. I'll see you there, and all the best to you.